Hi, everybody. Welcome to adding and subtracting positive and negative fractions, rational numbers. So, the steps that you follow when deciding to what to do when adding positive and negative fractions. First thing you have to decide is from the signs if you're going to add or subtract. Remember, same signs you add, different signs you subtract. Step 2, determine which term has a larger absolute value, then add or subtract. When subtracting, make sure that the larger absolute value is first in the problem. Third thing you have to do with fractions is make sure they have common denominators. If needed, if they already do, you're good. If not, you need to get them to common denominators. And then the fourth thing we have to do to solve the problem is determine if your answer is positive or negative, deciding which one has the larger absolute value. So the first problem we're going to do is negative 2 and 3/4 plus 1 and 1/2. I have written it up and down. So the first thing I have to do is need to decide if I need to add or subtract, and one is positive, one is negative. So I'm going to subtract and determine which one has a larger absolute value. Negative 2 and 3/4 would have the larger absolute value. So I put that one first in the problem, minus 1 and 1/2. Next thing it says is make sure they have common denominators, and 4 and 2 in the denominators are not the same. So I need to find common denominators so I can subtract these. So the first thing you're going to do is decide on your denominator. So my common denominator for 4 and 2 would be 4. If you take the multiples of the larger one, 4, and see when it works for 2. The first multiple of 4 is 4, and it does work for 2. So we're going to put a 4 in the denominator. And 4 times 1 is 4, so 3 times 1 is 3. So you do not have to change 3/4. It already had a denominator of 4. But in 1/2, you decide 2 times what gives me 4, and 2 times 2 gives me 4. So I'm going to take 2 times 2 to get 4. I have to do the same thing to the numerator, so 1 times 2 gives me 2. And since I'm subtracting and now I have common denominators, I just have to subtract the numerators. So you're going to take 3/4 minus 2/4, which gives me 1. And then 4 is still the same denominator. Don't always forget to do your whole numbers. So 2 minus 1 is 1. So I get 1 and 1/4, but the last step, step 4, determine if your answer is positive or negative. And since my negative 2 and 3/4 has a larger absolute value, the answer would be negative. So my answer is negative 1 and 1/4. So on the next problems we're going to do, if you want to pause it and write the problem down first, you may. First problem we're going to do is negative 2/5 plus 3 and 1/3. First step you have to do is decide if you're adding or subtracting by the signs, and one's negative and one's positive. That means we are subtracting. So now we need to decide which one goes first by doing the absolute values, and the absolute value of 3 and 1/3 is larger than the absolute value of negative 2/5. So 3 and 1/3 would go first in my subtraction problem, minus 2/5. Next thing is see if they have common denominators, and 3 is not the same as 5. So we decide on a common denominator. So I'm going to do my multiples of 5 because it's larger, it gets me there faster. So the first multiple of 5 is 5. That does not work for 3. You can't take 3 times something to get 5. Next multiple of 5 is 10. And 3 times something cannot give me 10, so that doesn't work. And then the next multiple of 5 is 15, and 3 times 5 does give me 15. So I'm going to put 15 in the denominators of both fractions. And for the first one, I have 1/3. 3 times what gives me 15, which is 5. So 1 times 5 is 5. So 5/15 is equivalent to 1/3. Next one, 5 times what gives me 15, and that would be 3. So 2 times 3 is 6. So that means 6/15 is equivalent to 2/5. Now, since I have common denominators, I just need to subtract. So 5 minus 6, but I cannot take 6 away from 5. So I'm going to have to go over and regroup or make it an improper fraction. So I'm going to take 1 away from the 3, the whole number, and make it a 2, and add a fraction that has a denominator of 15, but is equal to 1. And I have to have 15/15 to be equal to 1. So I'm going to put 15/15. And I'm going to add my 5/15 I had plus the 15/15 I regrouped from my whole number. And that would give me 20/15. Now I can subtract with the 6/15 because now my first number is larger than my second number. So I'm going to take my 20/15 and subtract my 6/15 now. And 20 minus 6 is 14. So I get 14/15. So my answer down here for the fraction is 14/15. So don't forget you have to do the whole number. And I have 2 minus nothing because my second number does not have a whole number. So 2 minus 0 is 2. Last thing we have to do is decide on our sign. And the larger absolute value of these two numbers would be 3 and 1/3. And it is positive. So my answer is positive. So your answer is positive 2 and 14/15. Next one, if you want to pause and try it on your own, you may. The next problems I have set up for you to do that. For on this one, we have to first decide if we're adding or subtracting. And this one, we have same signs. They're both negative. So if both numbers are negative, I need to add them. So I did put the larger one first. You don't have to when you add, but it's a good habit to get into so you don't mess up when you do subtraction. So I have the two numbers written above each other. I need to decide on a common denominator because 9 and 6 are not the same denominator. So I'm going to take my multiples of 9. The first one is 9, does not work for 6. Second one is 18, and it does work for 6. So I'm going to put 18 for my denominator for both fractions. So the first one, I take 9 times 2 to get 18. So 4 times 2 is 8. So I get 8/18 is the same as 4/9. And the next one, I need to put 18 in my denominator again. And I'd figure out 6 times what gives me 18, and that would be a 3. So 6 times 3 is 18, so 5 times 3 is 15. And this time I'm adding, and we only add the numerators since we did all that work to get common denominators. So I take 8 plus 15, which is 23, and you keep the same denominator. So it's 23/18. And we go ahead and add the numerators. So we have 5 plus 3. Sorry, we're going to add the whole numbers, not the numerators, guys. 5 plus 3, which is 8. And so I get 8 and 23/18, but that is an improper fraction. So we need to figure out how many 18s go into 23, and that is 1. So we get 1 and 5/18 plus the 8 I already had. And that gives me a final answer of 9 and 5/18. And the last thing we have to do in our steps is decide if it is a positive or a negative answer. And if you remember from our problem, both numbers were negative. So since both numbers were negative, my answer is still going to be negative. So my answer would be a negative 5/18. So we go to the next slide. If you guys would like to try these, it's try on your own. So go ahead and pause the video, and then we will come back. You can come back when you have these two problems done and see if you got the correct answer. So go ahead and pause your video now. So now we are going to see if we have to add or subtract. And I have one negative and one positive. That means I need to subtract them. So I wrote the subtraction problem already. So I have 1 and 3/10 minus 7/8 because the absolute value of negative 1 and 3/10 is larger than 7/8. So I got to do that. So I did common denominators. My common denominators would be 40. So I changed that 3/10 to 40 by multiplying both the numerator and denominator by 4. I changed 7/8 to 35/40 because I multiplied both numerator and denominators by 5. Now, if you notice, it's like we did on one of the problems on the last slide, that you cannot take 12 minus 35. So you have to go over here and regroup. So I took 1 away from the 1, which makes 0. And I put 40/40, which is equivalent to 1 whole and has the common denominator I need to be able to add with the 12/40. So 12/40 plus 40/40 gives me an answer of 52/40. Now I can go ahead and subtract 52 minus 35, which gives me an answer of 17/40. And you have to go back and look if you're positive or negative, and negative 1 and 3/10 has a larger absolute value. So my answer would be a negative 17/40 for that problem. So if we go ahead and do the next problem. So the next one says 3 and 4/9 plus negative 5 and 2/3. One is positive and the other number is negative in the terms. So we're going to go ahead and subtract. So I'm going to write my 5 and 2/3 first because it does have the larger absolute value. So I'm going to take my 5 and 2/3 minus my 3 and 4/9. They do not have common denominators, and the common denominator that would work for 9 and 3 would be 9. So I'm going to go ahead and find my common denominator for each one. So the 2/3, you multiply by 3 to get to 6/9, which is equivalent. And then my 9 would stay the same because 9 times 1 is 9. So 4 times 1 is 4. So now I go ahead and subtract 6 minus 4, which gives me 2. So my answer would be 2/9, and then subtract the 5 minus 3, which is 2. And if you notice, it is negative because negative 5 and 2/3 has a larger absolute value. Hopefully you got those two correct. If you didn't, we have two more to try. So in the last slide, the 3 and 4 you can try on your own. So go ahead and pause the video, decide if you're going to add or subtract, go ahead and get your answers to the sum or the difference, and then you can come back and restart the video when you have your answers completed. So we're going to go ahead and do the first one. Number 3, you're going to take negative 2 and 5/6 plus a negative 1 and 1/5. They are both negative, so you're going to add those two mixed numbers. So we're going to go ahead and add them. So I'm going to take my 2 and 5/6 and my 1 and 1/5. I wrote it up and down so I can get common denominators because 6 and 5 do not have common denominators. The denominator that works for both of these is 30. So I'm going to go ahead and change them both to 30ths. So the first one would be 25/30 by multiplying both numerator and denominator by 5, and then the 1/5 would change to 6/30 by multiplying the numerator and denominator both by 6. So we go ahead now and add 25 plus 6, which gives me 31/30, but that is an improper fraction, and I added the whole numbers. So you get 2 plus 1, which is 3, so 3 and 31/30, but 31/30 is improper. 3 goes into 31 one time. So I took my 3 and changed it to a 4. And then what would be left would be 1/30. So my answer would be negative 4 and 1/30. Negative 4 and 1/30. So I can get that out of the way so you guys can see that answer. And then on the last one, number 4, you are going to go ahead and look at the problem, decide if you add or subtract. And I do have one negative 5/12 plus a positive 6 and 2/3, and they are one of each. So you're going to subtract them, and positive 6 and 2/3 is larger. So it is going to go on top when you do the absolute values. So we're going to go ahead and figure out the answers. So you're going to take 6 and 2/3 minus 5/12. You do need common denominators, and the first multiple of 12 is 12, and that does work for 3. So my denominator would be 12 for each of them. And you do take 3 times 4 to get to 12. So 2 times 4 is 8. And for 5/12, it already is in 12, so you don't have to do anything to it. Just rewrite 5/12. Now we're going to go ahead and subtract them since the signs were different. 8 minus 5 is 3. So the numerator should be 3, and my denominator should be 12. So, and then 6 minus 0 is 6. And we decide if my sign is positive or negative, and it is positive because the absolute value of 6 and 2/3 is larger than the absolute value of negative 5/12. But in 6 and 3/12, you can simplify 3/12 by dividing the numerator and denominator both by 3. So 3 divided by 3 and 12 divided by 3 gives me a final answer of 6 and 1/4. So your final answer would be 6 and 1/4. Hopefully you guys got those two correct. If you need to practice more, we have a worksheet for you to do for your homework, so you can go ahead and practice on those. I hope you guys understand how to add and subtract positive and negative. Just add positive and negative fractions. Thank you.